All right, so welcome. This morning we're going to look at one of my favorite gospel stories, and it's the story of the widow's mite, and mite being spelled M-I-T-E. And I'll say a little bit more about that. But why don't we begin with a moment of prayer. Lord God, behind the ebb and flow of the seasons, we know there is the one thing that never changes, and that is your wisdom and your grace. So we come this day that we might be enriched by your truth that can show us the way to the life that is truly abundant. We ask that this time be a blessing unto us, so that we may go forth and be a blessing unto others by following in the footsteps of your Son, who is the way and the truth and the life. Amen. All righty, so the widow's mite is a story that takes place in the temple. Jesus is in the final days of his ministry, because we know that in Mark's gospel, as well as Matthew and Luke, Jesus does not go to Jerusalem until the very end of his ministry. And he sees this widow put two, some translations say copper coins, other use the word lepka. And essentially it was the smallest coin available as currency back then, and it was the equivalent of about a penny. And so it's called the widow's mite, M-I-T-E. So without further ado, Tom, you want to?
Yes.
All righty.
And he sat down opposite the treasury and watched the people putting money into the offering box. Many rich people put in large sums. Then a poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which make a penny. And he called his disciples to him and said to them, "Truly, I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the offering box. For they all contributed out of their abundance. But she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live on." Mark 13. And as he came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what wonderful stones, and what wonderful buildings."
All righty, and I realized that I did not start this at, thank you for the 2 pennies, Andy. Although you got change because the 2 coins made up 1 penny.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, copper coins. So I realized I did not start the reading at verse 38. So just quickly, and in his teaching he said, "Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and like greetings in the marketplaces, and have the best seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at feasts, who devour widows' houses and for a pretense make long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation." So put it all together, questions, comments, and conundrums.
Are scribes lawyers?
They're categories separate from the lawyers. The scribes were the ones that wrote down the teachings of the rabbis and wrote down the commentaries on the Torah, and the lawyers were ones who interpreted the commandments. Mm-hmm.
How do the scribes devour widows' houses?
It's a good question.
Paperwork.
Pardon me?
Paperwork.
Oh, maybe paperwork.
They're the ones who write everything out. So, in the probably legal part of things, in the handling of properties, they can be probably better than anybody else.
Right. So I would have to do some background checking, but My guess is that in order to, quote, foreclose on a widow's house, they needed legal documentations that had to be provided by the lawyers and written down by the scribes. And it may be one of those situations where legally they could take the house, but ethically, is it right? Jesus was one who constantly criticized the Pharisees for living by the letter of the law and not abiding by the spirit of the law. And so there's no love loss among the scribes and the lawyers and the Pharisees for Jesus, because he took the side of women like this elderly widow. Yep. Yeah. So one of the thoughts that's been going through my mind is, if I had been that widow in the temple that day, would I have been able to do what she did? And this passage obviously lends itself very nicely to a stewardship sermon, because it has to do with our relationship to material things and money, or as the Bible sometimes refers to it, manna, M-A-N-N-A. And I just keep saying to myself, could I have done what she did? And part of me was thinking, when Jesus said that she put in all she had to live on, or everything she had, I at first began to think, oh, well, she probably had a certain amount of income that she needed for the necessities, and then she had leftover money that could be used for extravagances or special things. And so maybe when Jesus said she put in everything she had, he was talking about, the extra, but he's not saying that. She put in everything. And so I do wonder, could I have done what she did?
Isn't the question, when he phrases it that way, can you really put your faith in the Lord?
Okay, all right. You're actually a step ahead of me.
Yeah,
Very good, very
that's a
good.
question. Yeah.
So the question is this a challenge to put your faith in the Lord? And my next question was going to be, what made it possible for the widow to do what she did that day? Was she just a few cards short of a full deck? Was she just naive? I mean, you could think, she could have just put it in there and said, oh, well, easy come, easy go.
When you're that poor,
Uh-huh.
is it, maybe it's easier to, when you only have one penny left to your name, is it, that's not gonna get you anywhere in life anyway, so.
Yeah, so it's not going to do me much good, so I might as well give it to the Lord.
Right.
Okay.
Whereas
but
if you
does
have
Jesus-
$1 million,
But that would lessen the sacrifice that she made. And Jesus doesn't see it in that light.
Right.
Jesus doesn't say, well,
She didn't have
she wasn't much she could do with it anyway, so she might as well give it to God and get some good brownie points on her heavenly report card. But Jesus is clearly very impressed. And he's also right, and things haven't changed much. Do you know who gives the largest percent of their income to charity?
Oh, the
Lower income.
Right.
The lower income. Now, you could make the argument that when you're starting with a lower amount, it doesn't take much
Right.
to make it a larger percentage. Obviously, someone like Jeff Bezos, who is worth might even be over $200 billion now, If he gives $1 billion away, that's what,
5%.
less than 0.1%.
Well,
10% would be 20 billion. 1% would be 2 billion. It's a quarter of a percent of his total wealth.
okay.
No, I'm sorry, 0.5% of his total wealth. Now you could make the argument that you can't calculate his giving on his total net worth. You got to go on his annual income. But let's say that if you had $200 billion and you got, say, a 3% return on it, which is, I think, very conservative. So 3% would be $6 billion a year. If he gives $1 billion, that is, what, about 1/6, so it's about 18%. Okay, so,
I have a different perspective on that.
all right, what's the different perspective?
If you look at the coins as part of our material being, our material wealth,
Yeah.
is this perhaps more a reflection on she has given of what she has here of herself on this earth versus her spiritual tangibility, if you will, and she is rendering up that of earth and to the spiritual.
Yep. So, and by the way, welcome, Charlene. And you're right, the lower income does give a higher percentage. And I hear you saying, Don, that she's more focused on the spiritual and the life to come than
It's not the money, it's what the money represents as physical
money
and
represents
tangible on earth versus her spiritual being.
Okay. So, yes, so she seems to be very concerned about her spiritual well-being.
Which to
But
give
you still
up
gotta
everything
eat.
on earth for a real wealthy person, that's a lot bigger jump from getting away from the tangible.
But she's still got to eat. And so if she's given away everything she had, unless she spent some money and stocked up on a few items, groceries and whatnot, how does she eat the rest of that day?
Isn't it written in the Bible that God said he provides for the animals and for everything here on earth, and if he does that, wouldn't he provide the same for us?
Yep.
And if we went by that, wouldn't her position be that God will take care of it, rather than commanding God to, but having faith that God will?
Right. So so you're referring to the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus says, consider the birds of the air. They neither toil nor spin nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Will he not also feed you? And I do believe that, but in that Sermon on the Mount, and it's really a parable that Jesus is telling, God doesn't say to the birds of the air, okay, you sit in the nest and I'm going to drop a worm into your nest. The bird still has to go out and hunt for its food and do its part. And couldn't you make the argument that this elderly widow isn't doing her part by giving away what she has? Okay.
But she's doing her part by still getting out and going to the church and making that donation.
Yep. Okay.
The relationship with God helps those who help themselves, the reference to the birds, which I think is true, and I think Andy's right. She's making the effort to get there to do that.
Okay, so she is doing her part. She's there in the temple. She is going in to the temple, putting her 2 coins in the offering box, knowing that she's surrounded by scribes and Pharisees and lawyers who are going to look down on her, and yet she doesn't seem to care about that. And, as you were talking, one of the thoughts that came to me is, yeah, she gives away all she had. But in her mind, she's probably saying, I can go out and make more money. I won't make a lot of money, but
I'll survive.
I'll survive. I can do my part, find a way to make, a little bit more. Obviously, she has money either by doing something or begging. We don't know, but it's clear in her mind that she will be able to survive, that she'll be able to earn more money or somehow get what she needs to survive. And I hadn't really thought about that before.
And she has the confidence to go out and do that because she has her faith in the Lord. She'll be taken care of.
Yeah, she definitely has faith. That is what makes it possible for her to do what she did. And Charlie just wrote, didn't people at that time often go a day or two without eating? Maybe her faith gave her strength to secure food in the next few days. And certainly people who have less are able to do with less. Yep. Go ahead.
The strength of your faith gives you energy also. It gives you purpose. We look when we're young and say, what am I going to do with my life? What am I going to do for a job? Somehow, when you have faith, the material part will come along, but it's not as important in your focus. And I think the faith is the energy that will carry her in this instance.
Yeah. And clearly, it is her faith that makes it possible for her to do what she did. And let's also be clear that she was putting into the offering box for the right reason. The Pharisees and the scribes and lawyers were putting it into the offering box for the wrong reason. They were giving larger amounts, but it was self-serving. Hey, everybody, look at me. Look at how much I'm putting in the offering box. They weren't doing it for the glory of God. They were doing it for themselves. This widow is doing it for the glory of God.
They were buying, she was giving.
What were they buying?
They were buying the credits with the other people.
Okay.
They were buying fame. They were buying the position.
They were buying the esteem.
Yeah.
Yep. And
I'm almost sure that they were kind of waving around the large denomination coin before they put it in the box.
oh,
I mean,
Flaunting.
Flaunting it. And from her perspective, she realized that that just like the two coins made a considerable difference in her own life, she realized that every little bit helped, and that if having those 2 coins was going to help me that much, maybe that by giving it was going to help somebody else in an equal way.
Yep.
So
So she clearly, because she is in a position of need and vulnerability, she knows what it's like for
Yes.
other people and is motivated to help them for the glory of God. As you were talking, it reminded me of a story. And family that lives in the Appalachian Mountains, way out in the middle of nowhere. And it was a very difficult winter. About halfway through the winter, there's a knock on the door. And when the mother of the family opens the door with the snow, 3 feet high, and it's a worker from a church or a charity or something. And he says, I'm from such and such a charity. And the wife or the mother says, oh, I'm sorry, it's been a really tough winter. I can't give anything. When in reality, he was there to help her to see if they needed anything. And I don't know why I just thought about that, but yeah, he was there to help and check on them, and she thought he was there to ask for a donation. But I sometimes say to people that you will often find God in your pain and your difficult moments and your suffering. in a way that you will not find God in your moments of joy. And I've seen people over the years who have been through great difficulty, and it has given them the ability to feel the pain of the world. And so in a sense, that suffering can be transformed into a blessing. And that happens when I think the person has faith. And because of that faith, it makes it possible for the suffering to make them better, not bitter. And, you know, I found myself.
I can personally relate to what you just said.
Yes, yeah.
Twice.
Twice. Mm-hmm. One, I'm guessing, is when Jessica passed away.
The other was when I broke my ribs.
Oh, when you broke your ribs.
And I had like 50 visitors come to my house.
Yeah.
80% of them were the church people.
We're 80% of the church people. Yeah. Yeah. You know, that's the one thing that I just don't get in our secular society is, are you missing the sense of community and the help and the caring that is so much a part of what we are about?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's also the reason why being in the sanctuary on Sunday morning, there's no comparison to that and watching it live stream. And I understand that there are some people who watching the live stream is their only way of being here. You know, I'm thinking of Barbara Tufts and Caroline Smith. And, you know, because of their age and difficulty with mobility, it's hard for them to be here. But they are here online, and they are thankful for that. But, you know, when you can be here and you choose not to be here, you're cheating yourself out of so much. And I think that's, you know, that's sad. The thing with this passage is I've read it many times, and this time when I've read it, I found my focus going in a very different direction. And yes, what we're talking about is what's been going through my mind and what I've been kind of wrestling with. And why I asked myself the question, could I do what she did? And let's just talk in general terms. Why would someone not be able to do what the widow did?
They have to decide which items they have to give up or donate, and they don't want to let go of any of their possessions.
Why not?
They are, if you pardon the term, married to them.
Okay, they're married to their possessions.
But another case I'm thinking of is if there's like a single mother with a child that she has to take care of. She has to consider the child's needs more than the church.
That's interesting because I had never thought about it, and I've been saying an elderly widow, but we have no way of knowing what her age was. And we have no way of knowing if she had responsibility for children. My guess is that she didn't, because that would have definitely made it harder for her to do what she did. But if it's just herself, that changes the dynamics, I think. So yes, so they're married to their wealth, their material possessions. And so if that's the case, what is the motivation, not the motivation, what is the thought going through your mind if you give it away?
So what was the first part of the question?
So what is the emotion that would prevent someone from doing what the widow did that day?
again, it goes back to the self-image part of it.
Self-image.
And, and when you say marriage, it's a two-way commitment. You have a commitment to the money or the tangible thing, and that does to you. How do you turn around to that and say, how do you say to the person you're working with, I'm leaving my job to follow Jesus? Why did a fisherman walk away and leave his family there? How do you turn to them and say, no, I've made this decision? That's hard.
Yes, yes, it is. It is.
Sacrifice. The emotion that would prevent you from giving one is greed.
Greed. Okay, one of the emotions that would keep a person from giving is greed, but it can't be greed in this situation. So I'm trying to put ourselves in the widow's shoes with only 2 copper coins. Okay, so I understand if I had 1,000,000 copper coins, greed would prevent me from doing what she did. But what would keep you from giving your last 2 copper coins away?
Necessity.
Necessity.
You had a need for those coins for something that
Yeah.
you needed to do to continue living.
Yeah. What about fear?
Hmm.
Fear. If I give these 2 coins away, am I going to go hungry?
Fear is a lack of faith.
Yes.
Yes, it is. It is. And
That's the point.
gold stars to all of you. You're getting, moving us down the road where I'm going with this. And like I said, I could give a sermon on stewardship, okay, because this is a woman giving something to the Lord. And you could talk about giving for the right reasons versus the wrong reasons. You could do a sermon on not worrying about what people think, because obviously she didn't care. Surrounded by all of these high and mighty Pharisees putting big sums in, she didn't care that they were going to look down on her. But you can also do a sermon on fear, okay? I think that a lot of us, it would be hard to do what she did because of a fear. You know, if I give these 2 last coins away, does this mean I'm not going to eat for the next 2, maybe 3 days? What's going to happen to me? And the reason why I've been thinking along these lines in terms of this story is because I'm afraid. And there's a comment here, and I'll get back to it. Exactly, Charlene. If you give it away, how do I know that I'm going to be able to earn some more money? You know, we don't know how long it took her to get these 2 copper coins. It may have been she did some sewing for someone, and you know, she could go out and do some sewing again. You know, we don't know. But you know, fear is what can keep us from doing what the widow did. And when I look at what's going on these days, it frightens me. Climate change. There are some scientists who are saying that the gathering in Glasgow right now is our last chance. That if we don't make significant changes and pledges of significant changes don't come out of this conference and are not followed, that it's our last chance to limit climate change, not eliminate it, limit it.
Limit our influence on climate change.
Limit our influence on climate change.
Really what it is.
And
The numbers said if you do something, we may be able to keep it to two
degrees Celsius
Right.
between now and the turn of the century.
But if we don't, it'll be like 3.7.
3.7, yes. And you know, that's why I like the words of wisdom from Native Americans. And it says, We do not inherit creation from our parents. We borrow it from our children. I think that's profound. So climate change has got me worried. The pandemic has got me worried. There's no doubt it's going to change things permanently. And I'm fearful that a number of people who have stopped coming on Sunday morning will never come back. And how is that going to affect us? I am also fearful that there's going to be another surge, that somewhere this pandemic is going to give birth to another variant that's even more powerful. In fact, there's one called Delta Plus, I think, and it's over in England. It's also been detected here in this country, in every state, but the numbers are very, very low. So apparently, even though it's very transmissible, it's enough people are being vaccinated and whatnot, or have already been infected, that it's not really taking a foothold. But I worry about that. Here's something else that terrifies me. Did you hear about the poll that was published just in the last couple of days, in which 17% of all people in this country believe that violence, like the violence that we saw on January 6th, may be necessary in order to get the country on the right track? And that among those who believe that the last election was stolen, 39% of people believe that violence is probably going to be necessary to get the country back on track. That terrifies me.
I have trouble getting my mind around the concept of people believing that in violence and that violence is necessary at all.
Exactly. Violence is necessary? What would Jesus say to that? Well, I know what he said. They who live by the sword shall die by the sword. I am afraid. And that's the lens that I'm seeing this story through today. That it would be frightening, I think, for a lot of us to do what the widow did that day. So what made it possible for her? Faith, exactly, Dawn. Faith. It was her faith that made it possible for her to do what she did. Now that leads to the next question, which is, okay, faith. Pretty obvious, pretty simple. You know, it reminds me of the children's message where minister asked the children a question, and the question was, who am I? I'm furry, and I have a bushy tail, and sometimes I'm gray, and sometimes I'm black, and sometimes I'm even red. What am I?
Squirrel.
Yeah, well, the little girl raises her hand and says, I know the answer is supposed to be Jesus, but it sure sounds like a squirrel to me. You know, so yeah, okay, so faith, absolutely. So, but what is it about faith that counterbalances the fear?
When I first looked at this, I looked at her giving it, and catchphrases run through
Sure.
my mind like everybody else's. And my first thought was, well, she put her 2 cents worth in.
Yeah, she put her 2 cents worth in.
And then I started to think of what that really meant in the context of what we're talking about in faith. And to me, with all these people who are important with influence, who pontificate, who say all the important things, it was important for her to put her 2 cents worth in. And with faith, she didn't have fear, she had humility and belief, and therefore she put her effort in because she was a child of God and unique in that, and did that without fear of the other parents.
So Yes, she clearly has faith in God, and it makes it possible for her to do what she did. So,
That's it, is the possibility is because of the faith.
so the violence of the summer of 2020 was an indicator of people who feel that strength, looting, destruction is the way to take control. Yeah, I would agree with that. But here's something else I would say. A lot of the violence that we saw was driven by fear. A lot of the violence was driven by fear. Fear that
Lose their country.
I'm sorry,
That
fear
they were going to lose their country.
fear that they're going to lose their country, or that they were going to lose their status in the country. Fear that the country is becoming different from what they used to know.
I mean, it's like the men who marched in Virginia and said, "We will not be replaced by Jews."
Oh, I didn't hear
I
that.
mean, you know,
That was, yeah,
that was their phrase as
That
they
was their
carried the
phrase.
torches.
We will not be replaced by Jews.
yeah, they were carrying torches, and that was
Yeah.
the chant that they gave out.
Okay.
And so it's a huge, although we would say irrational, but it is an idea that somehow the country as they perceived it or perceived it should be is being taken away from them. And they don't want to see all these other people have their, I say, equal share and say. And so we're not gonna stand for, black, yellow, and brown people and all these people
Mhm.
being in a position of authority or that. And
So
so
it's-
it's unacceptable. And the idea that because they perceive that they've now got this idea about somehow there's going to be a Messiah that's going to turn back the clock to 1952 or something.
Yeah, as you were talking, what went through my mind is that image that was on the news the summer before the presidential election, of the guy on the golf cart down in the villages in Florida and driving past the news camera and shouting white power. Okay. Behind that anger is fear.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Don?
In a nutshell, it's fear of change and losing control.
Fear of
And the
change.
control part of it is just what Tom was talking about. Other people would be in control if you lose control. Therefore, you have to control the other people. And one of the ways of controlling them is knocking them down. That's the violence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, knocking them down. I've always said, beware of anyone who can only make themselves look good by making everybody else look bad.
Yeah.
And we're seeing some of that. But I'm still trying to get to the kernel of wisdom that allows me to say, oh, of course, that's why faith is the answer to fear. What is it about faith?
Strength.
Strength.
Faith is strength. If you have that, you have put any fears you have aside because you're trusting in God. It's not that you don't go to God helps those who help themselves, but that faith, through that you learn God's way, and not necessarily by, in quotes, reading the Bible, but going into yourself and listening to that voice and knowing what it tells you and believing in it.
Yeah.
Faith, confidence, it gives you peace.
It gives you peace. Yeah. But again, why does it give you peace? I mean, I'm not trying to oversimplify, but if I eat a lot of spicy food, I know I'm going to get heartburn. If I come and sit in the pew and work on my faith, how does that translate to overcoming the fear?
I'm reading a book on Johnny Cash, like I believe.
Yeah, I remember you say that, Johnny Cash. And
Yeah.
what's the name of the book again?
Pardon?
What's the name of the book?
I don't remember the name, but it's a minister who wrote it, who went really through the same things he did.
Okay.
And basically, I just lost my train of thought.
I'm sorry. So we're talking about what is it? I was talking about spicy food, and I know that it's going to give me heartburn. So what is it about faith that makes me able to say I don't have to be afraid?
Okay, and I had said it was the strength of it, and that strength, if you believe in God's word, that is the strength in itself. God's word in you, not someone else telling it to you, because I referenced to Johnny Cash. He talks about the number one force in the world is God. Number two force in the world is evil, or the devil, and he looks at it that way. And if you choose not to listen to God, then the second down the line is going to work on you to try and get his place, and you need to be strong enough to listen to God. And it goes back to your story of the Indian boy and the two wolves.
Two wolves,
it's
right.
The exact same concept.
It's which wolf you feed.
Yes.
Yeah. The story with the two wolves is a little boy goes to his grandfather, Native American, and he says he's got two wolves that he can sense fighting in his head, and one is good, full of love and kindness and peace and charity, and the other one is full of hate and anger and vengeance. And the grandfather says, "Oh, I know these two wolves very well." And then the little boy says, "But grandfather, which wolf will win?" And the grandfather says, "That's easy, the one that you feed."
And the operative word is feed, and that is where we invest ourselves in God to listen to God.
And I think that's is very helpful, because when you work on your faith, you're feeding the good and you're starving the bad. And that's really what's happening on the other side of the coin too. Fear is feeding all the negatives and the bad. And look at what we're finding out now about Facebook and social media, okay? Despite their claims, we now know that they were feeding the rage and the fear and the anger. And why were they doing that?
They made money.
They made money. They discovered that when what they discovered is that posts that had to do with, hate and anger and violence got many, many more shares than a post of a puppy dog. And you know why? Money. Because Facebook knows that if you get, the more clicks you get, the more advertising you can sell. And so despite what Mark Zuckerberg is trying to spew as truth, I believe he's lying through his billionaire teeth. Look, I got my undergraduate degree in journalism, and I can tell you that news channels, newspapers, social media are not in the business of sharing news. They're in the business of making money.
Yes,
Why do you think we had yellow journalism, in the lead up to the Spanish-American War? Because they knew it would sell papers.
It's that old phrase in the newspaper journalism or magazine journalism: if it bleeds, or television, if it bleeds, it leads.
Right.
And we just saw a very unfortunate example in the past week or so, which culminated with the election in Virginia, that the fellow who won, one of his great campaign points was, I'm going to make sure, I'm going to pass a law that critical race theory is not taught in the Virginia school system. It never was. There were never any plans about it, but it didn't stop he didn't stop putting the idea of fear into his possible constituents.
When you have faith, and this is why I believe that it is so important for us to be working on our faith, because all this stuff that's going on, this is a very good possibility it's only going to get worse. And so when you work on your faith, when you nurture and nourish your faith, what it does is, A, it makes you more aware of the seriousness of evil and sin, but it also focuses you on, and it nurtures your belief in the goodness of God, the goodness of others around you, and the goodness in yourself. And I think that's what's going through this widow's mind as she puts her 2 copper coins in there. She's not going to give in to the fear. She puts those 2 coins in there because she knows that God is good and that God cares about her. And she knows that she trusts in herself as well. She's able to see, God has given me gifts and abilities, like, maybe she was a seamstress or something like that. She wasn't rich, but I have to believe that she knew that she could go out and earn 2 more copper coins.
She was perhaps one of the richest persons there.
She was probably one of the richest persons there that day, absolutely. I think I referenced this last week during the Bible study. Harry Emerson Fosdick's words to the hymn "God of Grace, God of Glory," where I think in the last verse he says that we have become rich in things but poor in faith. And so, this widow, because of her faith, it's able for her to focus on the goodness of God, God's love for her love for God. And I think we also referenced that she knows, as a person who struggles, that she's helping somebody else. And that's got to lift her spirits. And so when you have faith, it takes you away from all the negativity and you're able to focus on the positive, okay, in God, in others, and in yourself.
Why this went through 13 has been really just sort of jumping out at me for a couple of reasons on it.
It seemed we can bring it up.
Yep, go ahead. Yep.
And the reason is, we know throughout the Bible, the disciples follow Jesus. They go with him. They're physically, tangibly part of the world with him.
Mm-hmm.
And they haven't got a clue of what he's teaching.
Yep. Look, teacher, what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings. And they say that after Jesus has praised the widow for putting 2 copper coins in the offering box. And you're right, they don't have a clue. And it's why I asked the question, while they're in the temple, Jesus is impressed by the faith of the poor widow. The disciples are impressed by the magnificent temple. What impresses you these days? And what impresses people in general? I would say a lot of the wrong things. And faith makes it possible for you to be in awe of the widow rather than in awe of the temple. And what comes next is Jesus then says, you see these magnificent stones?
They're going to go away.
Yep, I tell you, the day will come when there will not be left one stone upon the other. And the biblical scholars believe that Jesus was referencing the rebellion against Rome in 70 AD, where the Romans came in and they leveled the city of Jerusalem. And you know what the only thing that was left standing? The Wailing Wall. That is the only thing that was left. And that's why it got the name Wailing Wall. Jews refer to it as the Western Wall. And essentially what would happen is over the centuries, Jews would go to the wall to pray that God will restore their nation. And they would get emotional and they would weep. And so that's where it got the name Wailing Wall. It is the only remnant of the temple that was left standing. Yep.
Their motivation for praying and regretting was, for many, they understood it, they wanted symbolic restoration of their faith.
Mm-hmm.
But for far too many, we want a temple again.
You want a temple.
And we can't get away from practicing our faith in God as an individual personal thing. Corporate is something we need, service, but they needed the building.
Yeah, they needed the
That was
building.
the wrong perspective.
They needed the building. And, well, it's like the hymn we sang Sunday. The church is not a steeple.
Yeah.
The church is not and the church is the church is the people. Yep. And yes, exactly. So, any other thoughts?
I know I think of La Salette, Catholic Church.
The La Salette Church.
In Ipswich.
Yeah.
They couldn't afford to keep that building anymore. So
Mm-hmm.
They lost that. But now they're meeting in a tent on the Topsail Fairgrounds.
Right. Yeah. And that's the group that Jeannie and Don are involved with. The La Salette Shrine up in Ipswich.
Right.
Yeah, they couldn't afford it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But the church, that didn't destroy the church because they moved to a tent.
And they have the one on the South Shore. So.
Yeah, in Middleborough.
Yeah.
Or Attleboro, somewhere down there.
Yeah, and that does a tremendous Christmas lighting.
Oh yeah, I know.
Very famous.
Yeah. Yep. And you know, I grew up in the South Shore, and I never went to the La Salette Shrine. I would like to go someday.
Yeah.
But yeah, now I just lost my train of thought. But that's okay. It probably wasn't worth saying, anyways. But you
So
know,
there's a La Salette in Middleborough.
or Attleboro, somewhere down in the South Shore. Yep.
So is La Salette a
It's an
order
order.
of the Catholic?
It's an order.
Oh, it's an order.
It's a religious order.
So is it?
Yep.
Is it beyond Massachusetts? Or
I don't know. Good question. I would assume that it is.
I believe it's international.
Yeah, I would think it's international. Oh, yeah, so Charlene was referencing the little ditty we all learned in Sunday school. This is the church. This is the church. This. Yeah, but how do you do it so it shows?
Do it this way. Put your fingers in and come on.
Yeah.
And then you.
Yeah, but I thought you could do it so it was outward,
No,
No.
I was
No,
thinking
you gotta invert.
like this.
Yeah. And go around like that.
This is the church. This is the steeple. Open the door and see all the people. There we go. Yep, I get it now. Yeah, and oh, I know what I was going to say. What we're all talking about is the reason why I'm not a big fan of the word church. If you hear the word church, what's the first thing that comes to mind? The building, budgets, things like that. So it's why I've always preferred the word body of Christ, because I think that's more faith-based. It's more dynamic. Actually, this is totally unrelated, but has anybody heard what the Baptist Church in Wakefield is going to do?
No, I haven't. I wanted to,
Yeah, that's the church that burned down about,
Yeah,
my gosh, about
Bethel is sitting there still.
isn't it about 4 or 5 years ago?
Yeah. and then-
That's only 2 years ago.
was it
Oh, no,
only
it's
2
got to be
years?
longer
Is it
than
longer?
that. Yeah.
Yeah. It seems longer to me. But,
And they're meeting at the Congregational Church.
Oh, they
To
are?
my knowledge, they were.
Yeah.
They were invited to meet there.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. I do remember that.
Yeah.
So are they going to rebuild? That's what I thought.
Well, that's the question, monetarily and the size of the congregation, can they do it?
Can they justify the original building, which was obviously built for a different time in a much larger, more,
I don't think they can do that.
Well, you have to remember the Congregational Church in Melrose that burned down.
That's right.
And everybody wanted to build the same church again, which was not feasible to do. I was on that committee, so I'm familiar with that one. And, that's why they have the modern church that they have. It served their needs of what they had to have for a building, but they still had that picture of the sanctuary with the beautiful carved walnut wall pieces, of which I have the last one in my house. There was a big battle over that.
Yeah. And I bet you they lost a number of members too.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. When they didn't build back, I'm sure some people, the way it was, I'm sure some people left.
Well,
one of the things that I like about that architecture, I'm not a big fan of contemporary church architecture in general, but one of the things I like about that
the sanctuary
floor
itself.
the sanctuary is in the center with everything else around it. And I thought that's really cool. So sanctuary is the center. So our faith and our worship of God is at the center, and everything flows out from
What
that.
else is around it then?
Classrooms,
Oh.
Sunday school rooms.
The
So,
kitchen, the classrooms, the offices, everything is out around. They have a school there, everything.
so it's an octagon, and all around the sanctuary is in the middle is a hallway, and on the outside of the hallways are the classrooms and there's
Okay. I think it was Spain, there was a church that was designed the same way.
Mhm.
They had the Catholic Church, it was all,
Mhm.
the chancel and everything was in the middle.
Yep.
And everything else was around and all the,
Was it a new church?
no, it was an old church. And
So, Charlene says they're going to rebuild from what she heard. And she says, years ago, the Baptist church hosted the Congregational church after it burned down in the early 1900s. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's always been a very strong tie between those two
Yeah.
churches, which they're opposite ends of the common, so it's a very logical thing.
So Charlene just checked, and it was struck by lightning on October 23rd, 2018. So it's about three years ago. Yeah.
somewhere in between.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone. Pray for the sermon.
Yeah.
I have faith in that.
Well, thank you. But I'll tell you,